What happens when the most important price in an economy is artificially suppressed for more than 3 decades? Japan answers that better than any country on earth. For over 30 years, interest rates stayed near zero. The government built up enormous debt. Businesses borrowed at historically low costs. Investors chased higher returns overseas. And the central bank kept the price of money artificially low. For a long time, it looked remarkably stable. But interest rates are far more than borrowing costs. They coordinate millions of decisions by entrepreneurs, investors, savers, and governments. Distort that signal long enough, and eventually you change the entire system. To understand today's Japan, go back to the early 90s. After a massive real estate and stock bubble burst, the country entered a prolonged slowdown. Banks stuck with bad loans, investment collapsed, growth slowed dramatically. Then another problem: deflation. Prices stopped rising, some even fell. Cheaper prices sound like good news, but expectations matter. If consumers believe things will be cheaper tomorrow, they postpone purchases, businesses invest less, activity slows further. The central bank wanted to break this cycle. Its solution was simple: lower interest rates. What began as an emergency response gradually became permanent policy. Markets rely on prices. Prices communicate information and coordinate decisions. Interest rates are among the most important prices in an economy. They influence whether people save or spend, whether businesses invest, whether governments borrow. From the Austrian perspective, interest rates aren't merely policy tools. They are market signals, signals about the availability of capital and society's time preferences. What that signal changes, millions of decisions change with it. Japan spent decades changing that signal. Imagine you are an entrepreneur with 2 investment opportunities. One earns 2% and the other 5%. If borrowing costs are high, you'll likely pick only the stronger one. But if loans cost almost nothing, suddenly projects that once looked unattractive become worthwhile. The entrepreneur isn't acting irrationally, he's responding to incentives. And the same principle applies to everyone: investors, banks, governments. Cheap money changes behavior. Over time, Japan adapted to this new world. Government debt kept rising. Today, it has one of the highest debt to GDP ratios on earth. So why didn't the crisis hit decades ago? Because debt isn't only about size, it's also about cost. As long as refinancing stays extremely cheap, even enormous debt can look manageable. But this creates something dangerous: dependence. The entire system gradually assumes money will always stay cheap. Eventually, the central bank went even further. It didn't just keep short-term rates low. It began controlling long-term government bond yields too. This became known as yield curve control. Rather than letting markets determine long-term rates, the central bank increasingly became the market. For investors, this was the new normal. One of the economy's most important prices was no longer fully set by supply and demand. Then the world changed. Inflation returned. Supply chain disruptions. Energy shocks. Years of expensive monetary policy. Prices began rising again around the world, and Japan couldn't avoid it forever. Government bond yields started climbing. The price of capital began changing once again, and suddenly everyone had to adapt. Governments don't repay all their debts at once. Old bonds mature, new bonds replace them. If interest rates rise, new borrowing becomes more expensive. And that adjustment happens gradually. Investors respond too. Japan's national pension fund, one of the largest in the world, spent years investing heavily overseas. Not for political reasons, but economic ones. Foreign assets offered higher returns. Now, as Japanese yield rise, domestic bonds become attractive again. Price change. behavior changes. The consequences don't stop with governments and investors. Households adapt too. For decades, stable prices were normal in Japan, and many people built their financial lives around the expectation. Then inflation returned. Food, energy, and imported goods got more expensive. Wages have started rising again, but for long stretches prices rose faster than incomes, meaning falling purchasing power. Some households delayed spending, others worked longer, some postponed retirement. Not because people changed, because incentives did. Japan isn't simply a story about debt, it's a story about incentives. When governments interfere with one of the economy's most important prices, they don't just influence financial markets, they reshape behavior. Businesses invest differently, governments borrow differently, investors allocate capital differently, families make different financial decisions. Over decades, those millions of decisions create an entirely new economic equilibrium. And when the underlying price changes again, the entire system must adjust. Japan isn't simply a story of good or bad policy, it's something deeper. Prices carry information, and interest rates may be the most important price in any market economy. When that signal is distorted for decades, expectations change, investment changes, economic structure change, and eventually the entire economy changes. The real question was never whether cheap money was good or bad. The real question is this: what happens when an entire economy learns to live with an artificially distorted price of capital, and that price finally begins moving back toward the market? Japan may be the first country to answer that question, but it almost certainly won't be the last.